with us today with the Mercer Group. I think I saw him on a few moments ago. Before we call on Mr. Ellis to review his proposal, we'll ask the council members to introduce themselves. And Councilman Roger, we'll start with you.
Roger Coleman, serving my second year as a councilman here in Edenton.
Hey Ellis, Hackney High, I'm an attorney here in Edenton and was elected the same time Roger was. Have been here just under 2 years and look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Craig Miller. I'm serving my 4th year on the council, retired administrator. Good to have you here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Elton Bond Jr. This is my 8th year. 8 years. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say tonight.
Hi, Ellis. I'm Jimmy Stallings, and we've met before. And I'm the mayor this year. This is my second year, I believe.
I'm Roscoe Poole, councilman of the 3rd Ward, also a member of Post 40. A whole lot of other stuff. Okay. Thank you.
Hi Ellis, Anne Marie here. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Tammy.
Hi, I'm Tammy Woodley. I work for the town of Edenton, assistant to the town manager.
Okay, Ellis, we're certainly glad to have you here tonight, and we'll turn it over to you, and you're going to give us a review of the proposal for recruitment, screening, and selection of our town manager. So the show is all yours.
Well, Member Stallings and council members, thank you. It's good to be with you from afar. I would rather be in Edenton. I haven't been there in a while. I look forward to coming back. You all have a task, a tall task, but an opportunity in front of you. So it is going to be a challenge to replace a long-time successful and wonderful town manager. But you have that opportunity. Thank you for taking time to consider our proposal and to talk with me. I had to stop digging in our yard to talk with you, so thank you for getting me out of that. And if you hear construction noise, that is next door, and so I apologize for that. There's nothing I can do about that. I sent Anne Marie our proposal that I prepared on behalf of our firm, the Mercer Group. Let me start by telling you just a little about our consulting firm and then about me. Our firm is a nationwide public sector consulting firm founded by Jim Mercer 35 or so years ago. Jim started out as an assistant city manager in Raleigh. So the firm really has its roots in North Carolina. He and his wife now live in Santa Fe. They can live anywhere they want, and he's getting up in years, but he still has his hands in this work, and he's one of the veterans. I joined the firm when I retired from my day job at the League of Municipalities 7 years ago now. Time flies. I served with the League for almost a total of 30 years, 2 different periods of time. General counsel, chief legislative lobbyist, and that wore me down. I went back into private law practice. Eventually came back and served as executive director for 17 years and enjoyed almost every day of that, despite some vexations along the way. Certainly enjoyed serving municipal officials all across North Carolina and working on a lot of interesting issues, working on behalf of municipal officials in our cities and towns. I've kept my hands in since I retired. I'm utterly unsuccessful at retirement. I enjoy this consulting work, still have a law license, and I am still a town attorney and a county attorney. And I teach a good bit. It's been a while since I've taught a full semester course, but it is a joy to work with bright, responsible young folks, some of whom are future city and county managers. So I enjoy all of that. And plus some volunteer work, which I still do to keep my hand in. The proposal I sent you, I think is self-explanatory, except I noticed we had it say city manager right on the front. I think everywhere else it says town manager. It tells you more about our firm, and there's more about let me hit the highlights for you, but what I really want to do is answer questions that you all might have about this process and the way we would suggest, if you retain us to assist you, that you go about it, your search. And there's a timeline that I want to talk to you about, the proposed timeline that I put in the proposal. I suspect you all have talked with another firm. There are two firms that do most of these searches in North Carolina these days. You're going to be in good hands no matter what you do. I hope you see fit to retain us. I would welcome the opportunity on behalf of our firm to work with you all on this search, which will be in good hands no matter what you do. You look at our proposal at page 6. There's an executive summary. It really lays it out. Several steps in the process and the proposed fee, the timeline, and some other information. Further on, there also is a list of searches that I have actually had my hands in on behalf of the firm as the lead consultant and project manager all across the country. I've had a great time doing this work, enjoy doing it. Large cities to small towns, to state municipal leagues, to public risk pools, a good variety of those. But the process really is the same. Whether we are working with a large city or a small town, it centers on trying to help the governing body figure out exactly what you want. What is it that you are looking for? And how do you want this process to come out at the end? And you have to get that right in the beginning. And so we always try our best to help the mayor facilitate a discussion at the very beginning with the individual council members. We meet with each of the council members and the mayor. Then ideally a council meeting that evening with a public hearing to hear from your citizens about what they think you ought to be looking for. That worked very well when I did this in Manteo about 2 years ago and in Southern Shores, and particularly in Manteo. The council chamber was full, the board room was full of citizens, interested citizens who, for the most part, had very constructive comments about what they thought Manteo Board of Commissioners ought to be looking for in their next town manager. Again, following a town manager in Manteo's case that had been in that position for a lot of years. In Southern Shores, that also worked pretty well. They didn't have the tenure and the stability and continuity that y'all had. But there was a town manager who had been there, I guess Anne Marie, in Peter's case, 6-7 years at least. So a good track record to follow up on. Again, interested citizens from the town came and talked with the council about what they thought the council ought to be looking for. Then I also met with the group of department directors, which I always think is an important step. They all understand that this decision is the council's decision, not theirs, but it is, I think, essential to give the department directors some input into the process early on, their advice, their thoughts about what they think you ought to be looking for. And I don't mean people that they want us to go recruit, although I'm always open to hearing suggestions about people that we ought to try to recruit. But I mean generally background, experience, qualifications, personal characteristics that the council, citizens, department directors think is important for the council to be looking for. And so I sent along with our proposal one of the work products that results from those discussions. I sent you the Manteo Town Manager recruitment brochure that we did. Here's another one that we did for Southern Shores. Lots of nice photographs. You all won't have any trouble coming up with nice attractive photographs. We're including in that recruitment brochure. But toward the end, there's always a list of bullet points And that comes directly from folks, from what folks say they think the council ought to be looking for. And so this recruitment brochure really serves two purposes through the process. It's the recruitment brochure that I send to a lot of folks to try to get them interested in applying for the position. But it really also is a roadmap for you all to look back at and remind yourselves what you said you're looking for when you approve this, which you do. I'll also ask you to approve the timeline early in the process so that we all stick to that. Anne Marie has given you all plenty of notice to allow you plenty of time to do an orderly but expeditious search. And then to have the person you select come sit with her for a week or so, maybe longer, in an orderly transition period, which is always the ideal thing that you want. So that's the early part of the process of the recruitment brochure. We place job ads in every productive place we can think of. There's really nothing magic about a job ad, but we'll work with you on that, on what it says. And we'll place it in the obvious places. The League of Municipalities, Association of County Commissioners, several of the NPA, the Master of Public Administration programs in North Carolina, and in Virginia. I mean, I know the Albemarle region has real ties to Virginia. I will tell you that when we place those ads with some of the MPA programs in Virginia and elsewhere, that yielded, for both Manio and Southern Shores, that yielded a good number of pretty high quality applications for those governing bodies to consider. So we would do that again. We would, this is I don't know if this is really a national search. We would talk with you about placing the ad with the ICMA, the International City and County Management Association. But it more likely is really a search that needs to focus, for the most part, on North Carolina and Virginia. Although I can tell you you're going to get plenty of applications from all over the country. I just finished, or I'm about to finish, the High Point City Manager search. We got 50-some applications, but we got about 20 that were very high quality. Many of those were from North Carolina, but a good number of those were from other states too. Today was a big day because the council's preferred candidate in the High Point City Manager search accepted their negotiated offer of employment and the terms of employment. So they did well, and I always want to be able to say that the client, with our assistance, finds a manager who, in the judgment of the town council, is a good fit, well qualified, and can serve the town well for a long time. So after we place those ads in productive places, we don't stop there. We don't just sit, wait for applications to start arriving. When the council approves this recruitment brochure, I send this to everybody I can think of who either might be interested in applying or can help us encourage some folks they know of and they think might be a good fit for the position. And then we start making a bunch of phone calls. And by we, I mean not just me, but other members of our consulting firm all over the country. I will talk to some of my partners. Who do you know who might have worked in North Carolina, may now work someplace else, wants to come back to North Carolina, who might be a good fit for this position? And I get their help in identifying potential candidates and helping me to encourage them to consider applying. And then the resumes start coming in. I evaluate those as they come in. It always happens that we get a lot of applications from folks who really are not strongly qualified, might not really have a good idea what this job is. But we're going to get a good number from folks who are well qualified. Those are the ones we want, and we can pick those out along the way. And I will start a conversation with the folks who appear to be well qualified. I'm going to know some of these folks. I can guarantee you that. Some I won't, but I will get to know them. The ones who appear to be well qualified. before the application period closes. But almost always, the stronger applications come toward the end of the application period. Always makes me nervous. You can never count on that. But the strongest candidates tend to do more research, think about it more carefully, do their due diligence, might talk with me a couple of times, and then apply toward the end of the application period. Almost always. Almost always we end up with a strong field of candidates after a lot of active recruitment, a lot of phone calls. For the High Point City Manager position, I started to get a little nervous. That's an attractive job. City managers in North Carolina don't come open very often. Made a lot of phone calls. We ended up with a very strong field. And I'm always happy when that happens. But I never take that for granted. I start doing a preliminary background investigation as these resumes are coming, Google searches, everything I can find out. What I'm doing is getting ready to send written information to the governing body before what we call the semifinalist selection meeting, which is a closed session discussion with the council. The written materials that I send usually highlight about 10 to 12, maybe as many as 18 candidates who appear to be well qualified for the council's consideration. And then I go have the discussion with the council to assist them through, through the process of narrowing the field down to ideally 5, maybe as many as 7 candidates who appear to be very well qualified and a potential good fit for Edenton in your case. Why 5 to 7? If you invite fewer than about 5 to an interview, that's risky because you tend to lose some candidates between then and the interview period. We lost one in High Point. The High Point folks invited 6 candidates. They ended up interviewing 4 because we lost 2 of them. One withdrew because circumstances changed back home. One of them withdrew because he accepted another position in a larger city. So they started with 6 selected to invite, interviewed 4, and there were 4 strong candidates, and they found the person they really wanted among those 4 candidates. They involved some citizens too in the process, which we can talk about later if you want to. When the council selects the folks to invite for an interview, we start our formal background investigation, background check. We like to do those and complete those before the interviews so there are no surprises. If there are issues that pop up, a DWI conviction 20 years ago when the person was in college, credit issues, we can discuss those with the candidate, maybe resolve those. They're usually not major issues. Every now and then there is a major issue, like someone lying about a college degree or a master's degree. That's clearly a disqualifying problem. But we like to complete those background checks before the interviews. So we help the council then prepare for the interviews. There's a process we go through to help the council select interview questions. We help schedule the candidates and generally prepare the council for the interview and then the discussion. When the interviews are finished, we help the mayor facilitate that discussion. So usually one of 2 things happens after the initial interviews. I thought the High Point folks were likely to invite 1 or 2 finalists back for a second interview to make sure they had found the person they wanted. They were so sure, they wanted to go right on to making a job offer in their case to 1 finalist. And so I did that on their behalf under their instructions. Part of our contract is to help negotiate the terms of employment. And today, those negotiations in High Point's case came to a successful conclusion, not yet announced. So what if every now and then it does not go well and We don't have a field that is as strong as you might like. Maybe you go through the interviews and you just don't find the person that you think you want. Our proposal and our contract will be clear. We will keep working with you until we find the right person. That's one of our guarantees. It's right there in our proposal and will be in the contract. That's rare, has happened in searches here and there, but our job is to help you get to where you decide you need to be. So, Mayor and council members, that is the process. One final comment about the timeline. Anne Marie's announced retirement date is the end of September, so you have plenty of time. You don't want to start this process too soon and finish it too soon, because then potentially it becomes awkward. Assuming that you select someone externally, that person, if employed somewhere else, needs to give a reasonable notice, and then he or she needs to get there to work for that transition period that I mentioned. Anne Marie has given you plenty of time. At page 16, I've given you a typical timeline for a search. This proposed timeline is subject to alteration as you all see fit, but these are the general time parameters, council meetings, and everything else that needs to happen in between to get to the finish line at the right time. We've given you our cost proposal. We've given you our code of ethics, the guarantees, a proposed agreement that tends to work well, a list of our previous clients, including a good number in North Carolina. So, Mayor Stallings, let me stop there. I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions? Who wants to start? Go ahead. Ellis, let me apologize in advance. I've got a lot of interest in your proposal, and therefore I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. The first one is just
lawyer questions.
I've got my legal pad out, if that answers your question. But no, I think they'll all be fairly easy for you to answer. First of all, I want to make it sure it's clear when you talk about your work with the League of Municipalities, that is for the North Carolina League of Municipalities. Yes. Is that correct?
Yes. Born and raised in North Carolina, had the great privilege of working for the North Carolina League of Municipalities for more than 29 years, 2 different periods of time.
And I know in your cover letter, you expressed some knowledge of Edenton and its needs, and I would be interested in what you and your team do know about Edenton. And we feel like it's a special place, and we want to make sure that we're not getting some sort of cookie cutter approach. So if you can speak of your knowledge of Edenton, that would be helpful.
It was a special place even before King George I issued a royal decree to incorporate the town in 1722. I mentioned in the letter that one of my first assignments as a brand new lawyer on the league staff, 2 years out of law school in my case, after I lost my first criminal jury trial to Mike Easley, that's another experience. I was asked to draft the bill, do the research and draft the bill to revise the town charter. That had not been completely done since the royal decree in the first place. That same year, I also got to revise, draft the bill to revise the Hillsborough town charter. That hadn't been done since, I believe it was in 1759, another royal decree. So that's how I started, learning about Edenton, made some visits. I think Bill Gardner was the town administrator, I'm not sure. But there were several mayors to go. Obviously, I've made a lot of visits between then and now to Edenton, know the community, I've been there for a while. Certainly talked with Anne Marie, Mayor Vaughn, others. Mayor Vaughn served on the league board of directors. Spent a lot of time on the phones and with some town attorneys, talking about the town of Edenton issues over a lot of years. As I said, we welcome the opportunity to work with the council on this.
Thank you. And did I hear you say that as a part of the proposed process that you see for us, that you would meet with citizens down here in Edenton to find out what their needs were and wants were in terms of a future town manager?
Yes, and that's steadily becoming easier and more realistic to do. When I worked with the Southern Shores folks, the pandemic had just started, and so I had to get some special permission to even get into their county. Couldn't do as much of that face to face as I wanted, as I love to do. I had a lot of telephone conversations and Zoom discussions from afar with folks in Southern Shores. Did more of that in Manio, which was pre-pandemic. So I like to set aside a whole day and just come down and meet individually with each of the elected folks, and then I mentioned the council meeting usually that evening. The department directors typically in the afternoon or morning. But then I always ask the council and the town manager, for that matter, to identify not a large number, but at least 5 or 6 interested folks in town, interested citizens that I ought to talk to, and give them an opportunity to talk with me, and for me to listen to them about what they think you ought to be looking for. I always learn something. I did that in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, about 4 years ago. I didn't know anything about that community, but I learned a lot about that community in that process. So that's always valuable.
Appreciate it. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Rankins, do you have anybody in the back of your mind right now who you might think would be a good fit for this position here at Edenton?
Honestly, don't, only because I haven't really thought about it. Sometimes I do. I do know of some folks whom I have met in other contexts, maybe another one of these searches, who impressed me. I certainly would send this recruitment brochure to. In some of those cases, I don't know what their circumstances are now. But I can think of some folks who might potentially be interested. I would want to spend some time talking with them to assess for myself, first of all, their interest, and start forming an opinion about their potential fit. But my opinion is less important than yours near the end of the process. Obviously, you all have the challenge and the opportunity to make that decision about who you decide is the best fit right now. So right now, off the top of my head, no, but folks are probably going to occur to me as the process goes along.
Thank you.
Mr. Hankins, is there a rule of thumb for how much time the new town manager should spend with the outgoing town manager in order to make for a smooth transition?
Don't want it to be too long a time. There's one town manager at a time. Typically a week, sometimes 2-3 days in a week. 2 weeks might not be too long. It's really up to the 2 people who are involved. You can learn, a new town manager certainly can learn a lot within a week from the retiring town manager, and not just about the town budget and the number of town departments and who does what, and et cetera. The best candidates, frankly, are going to do a lot of research before they even decide to apply about those things. But conversations about you all, the council, how the council works, what are the preferred methods of communication, who are the folks in town, the interested citizens that the new manager really needs to go get acquainted with and listen to. The relationships with the legislative delegation, that sort of thing. The last audit, and the information that's behind that audit and the financial statements that might not be immediately apparent really up to the incoming town manager and the retiring town manager. And you know, good town managers when they retire, and I know this will apply to yours, don't hang around. They don't look over people's shoulders, but they remain available. And that's always comforting to a good new town manager who has the professional self-confidence and professional maturity that you're going to want. And good managers are going to take advantage of that without abusing that relationship.
Thank you.
I was just interested, sir, you've been in this business for a long period of time. What is your success rate?
It's high. I can tell you it was in the firm, Jim Mercer and a lot of folks have been associated with the firm before I joined the firm. I knew the culture of this firm and the work ethic before I joined it. When I retired from my day job at the league 7 years ago, there were several things I wanted to do. I wanted to go teach some more. I had taught some in the MPA program at UNC. I thought it would, and I did more of that, but I thought it would be cool to also see if I could talk my way into teaching some at NC State and Duke too. Not my home court, not one of them, but I did. But I could have, if I wanted to do this consulting work, I could have joined several other consulting firms, but I joined this one because I knew Jim Mercer and I knew the culture and the work ethic of the firm and the success rate. It's high. And mine personally, on the list of search projects that I've had my hand in that I listed for you in our proposal at page 9, all of those are successful searches. There was only one on that list that really requires some special effort the first time through. We didn't get, and the town, frankly, was a bit of a challenge. It's a rural town, a town that struggled after some hurricanes, for example. And I knew it was going to be a difficult assignment. I took it on anyway, and we did struggle some, but we kept at it until we finally did find a candidate that the council thought would be a good fit to take on this responsibility. So we do what we need to do, and the success rate is high. We have never walked away from one of these in frustration and failure. At least, well, I can't say never. I don't know what might have happened within the firm someone 20 years ago, but I know I never have, and I never will.
Can y'all hear me? This is Sambo.
Yeah, we can
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Ellis, good to see you face again. I really appreciate you zooming in. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but
Good to
I
see
guess
you,
you're
sir.
not either. And one thing I liked what you said is that you sort of look at our assets that we have, and I think we're in a really strong position now. We have a really old, strong downtown Main Street program. We have probably have the most, well, we have an award-winning, successful redevelopment zone that is sort of rewriting a lot of, sort of our path to the future and restoring houses and fixing up neighborhoods. We have done a lot with our infrastructure, sewer, water, cleaned up a lot of drainage problems. So I think Anne Marie's gotten us in a great place to launch the search. And I think that's our best platform right now, is that we actually have, we're in such a good position. Clean audit, all those things. And, I just really look forward to seeing what we'll end up with.
Well, Edenton, there are several things going that will be attractive to potential candidates. Management stability, can't tell you how much that means to managers. It is, I know you all probably realize how rare it is for a good, successful town manager to serve 33 years in a position. I've only dealt with one other situation with one of these searches where that was the case, and it was one I mentioned, South Kingstown, Rhode Island, several years ago. The 40-year town manager was retiring. That really means a lot to potential candidates. Edenton obviously is a beautiful, historic community. There is a, in some ways, it will be easier than it sometimes is to sell to potential candidates who might decide they are interested in applying. On the flip side of that, all of us in the firm have certainly had other situations where we've had to work harder to explain, and I will say just be straight with candidates. I always am straight with folks. High Point, for example, I'm not telling anything that's confidential. The High Point city manager terminated a city manager after almost 5 years. And so I asked all the questions I could. Obviously, some of that was confidential personnel information among the elected officials about why they terminated the manager. But I wanted to be able to be straight with potential candidates about what happened and how and why. And I got to the point where I could, in good faith, tell candidates that I thought that was a desirable city manager position in a community with great potential. High Point is kind of like the way I viewed Durham 20 years ago. Lots of issues, but great potential. Durham has had a renaissance since then. I think High Point has the same potential. I don't have to do that if you all retain us with Edenton, because there is going to be so much that is attractive to potential candidates. I mean, Edenton is some folks will think, well, that's great. That is not a problem. I mean, it's toward the outer banks. So that will be attractive to a lot of folks, and particularly some folks who have lived and worked in Virginia, may have experience working in North Carolina, but know the area. So.
And I think one thing that is so important when we start finding somebody is that a person that works, like we have a town county economic development force team, and Anne-Marie has worked so well building partnerships. That goes with the tourism board. Everything we do, she is an active partner in those organizations. And I think we just have to make sure we end up with somebody that is, partner oriented, that realizes that even as a town in a county, and we have to all work together to make a better place for everybody.
Well, that is the sort of thing that I need to understand from you all and make sure is reflected in this proposal, so that folks understand the character of the community and what you really want and need in that town to be another successful town, and with any luck for a long time. Again, you're probably not going to get another 33 town. But you might if you hire another one who's 27 years old.
Any other questions anyone has?
I've got one more.
Go ahead.
Yes, I would guess that we're currently paying our town manager below scale in terms of what other town managers are receiving. Would you be responsible for helping us to understand what an appropriate salary might be?
Yes, I have not looked, so I don't know, but yes, that is part of our scope of work and responsibility to you all to help you fashion, at the end of this process, a fair and attractive offer of employment, certainly including salary, a lot of other things too, but salary is important. You can touch base. There are a lot of benchmarks. The League of Municipalities publishes a salary survey that publishes it for the world to see, but we can get it. To do those comparisons, and you look at towns in population range, budget size, cities with particular characteristics like owning and operating the electric distribution system, natural gas, whatever, to come up with those comparisons. And yes, part of our responsibility is to help the town council come down on a reasonable, attractive job offer and give us instructions to go begin the negotiations.
Well, Ellis, would we just throw a salary out there for whomever, or is the salary gonna be based upon the individual and their capabilities and their whatever?
Well, some of all of that. First of all, the salary of the current town, the retiring town manager is a matter of public record. So I never hide that ball. If somebody asks me, I tell them, because it's a matter of public record. And I always tell them, I would in your case. Now, bear in mind, I cannot guarantee what the council will do. I certainly can't guarantee that the council would offer a salary in that ballpark to a brand new town manager as compared to a retiring town manager with a long tenure. But that is some salary history that you all have out there. I would help you with those comparisons. We typically don't, in this recruitment brochure, publish that salary. Sometimes we do, and particularly if the council wants to. Usually there is not a salary range for the town manager position. If there is, we usually put that out there. Usually there's not. But it's a case-by-case thing. Near the end of the process, when you all select the semifinalists, one of the things I do is send those selected folks before the interview a list of questions for them to answer in writing. Things like management style, other information about them, accomplishments they're proud of, that sort of thing. That tells you a lot more about those candidates. It gives you a writing sample. But one of the questions also is, please tell us your current salary. So we know that going in. And if that person is just out of your ballpark, we know that. And I can tell you that. But if not, then I can tell you what to expect.
Anyone else have any questions of us? Henry? Statements? If not, Ellis, we certainly appreciate your time and taking your time to interview with us, and we will certainly take all of this information into our thought process, and I'm assuming Anne-Marie will be the one getting back to you.
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Kat sat through this. We enjoyed it. Appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you very much, and with that, if no one else has any questions, and you don't have anything else, we'll let you go.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Alice.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
That was very, very informative. It's a process we're not looking forward to. Okay, moving on.
Can I ask you one question before you move on?
Sure.
And we've interviewed 2 consultants. Will the council have a special meeting to go to, so for us to sit down and talk about these consultants and pick one of these firms?
Yes, that would be the next step, and either later this evening or tomorrow, we'll text you some proposed dates, you know, maybe the end of this week or sometime next week. I really think it would be helpful if you make a decision sooner rather than waiting for your May. I think your council meeting in May is like May 11th or 12th. But if you can try to make a decision and get the contract executed and then get things started sooner rather than later.
Okay.
And Emery, do you know right offhand, is that the discussion of the qualifications of a vendor? Does that qualify for one of the exceptions under the public meetings, open meetings law, or do we have to discuss those qualifications in an open meeting?
I believe you do, and I'll verify that, but
If you can just make sure, and just as long as we're following the law,
Sure.
I'm fine with that. Okay.
Okay, having said all of that, the next item on our agenda is a budget amendment for recruitment, screening, and selection services. I'm gonna call on Anne Murphy for that.
Yes, Mayor, and Virginia and I are still working out the details of that, and we don't have an amendment to present to you tonight, but we will have it when you have your special meeting to make the selection.
All right, moving on, we'll call on Ms. Colleen Carl, if she will. She is with the Edenton Environmental Group, and we'll ask her if she will to go to the podium and present the results.
Well, good evening to everyone, and thank you, Mayor Stallings, for that introduction. It's really nice to see folks in person for a long time. It's been a long year. I'm glad to be here today to provide a couple of updates and some thoughts for going forward with some of the work that the CEG has been doing over the last couple of years. And even during the COVID times, we stayed very active with the research community. Most of our work for the last few years has been focused, you can go ahead with the next slide there, has been focused on water quality and related issues, and that was certainly brought to our attention about 5 years ago. But I want to draw your attention to the third bullet up there. We take very seriously those actions that we can do or propose to help reduce or correct some of the local environmental issues here. Next topic, please. Since 2015, we had an eye-opener that year. Some of those pictures are from 2015. But nothing really has changed in our water system. We're still being plagued by the cyanobacteria blooms. And last year was a strange year. People say, well, there weren't any blooms. Well, there were a few of them. And as you know, they're sort of elusive. Sometimes they hide in places we can't even see. But nonetheless, they probably will be back without a doubt this year. And some of our work is focused on why they're where they are and trying to understand that a little bit better. So next one, please. For the last 5 years, the CEG has sent micrographs, which are microscopic pictures, from 4 locations in Chowan County, some here in town, some up in the county, of what kinds of algae we have growing in our waterways, along with some of the other graphical pictures that folks send in and take in. But we've been doing a lot of concentrated work in that regard, trying to identify what those genera are, and also trying to catalog them, because they change during the seasons. They actually are different species during different times of the year. Okay, go ahead, please. So I wanted to just bring you an update on what we are partnering, or who we are partnering with, and the kinds of things that we've been doing over the last 5 years. Not only have we sent micrographs to NOAA religiously almost every week, especially during the summertime, but we also have done a lot of water sampling for nutrient analysis, some of that coming through a Clean Water Act grant, which went to the Council of Governments a couple of years ago. This will be the 3rd year that we're doing that this year, to look for residual nitrogen and phosphorus that are in the waterways. And then we wrote a grant with, it was a community collaborative research grant with UNC and also some other funders on that, to do a bioassay in 2019 in Edenton Bay. And the results of that were pretty interesting. We did actually a spring, summer, and fall, so there were 3 sets of assays there to determine which nutrient was the most important to the algae that were living there at that time. Last summer, even in the middle of COVID, we did a very interesting project, which will continue this year, on Pembroke Creek and also up at Chowan Beach, where the researcher was looking at aerosolized, don't ask me to say that word fast 3 times, but aerosolized toxins that would come off these algae, how much of that would we be breathing in, and how much of that might be harmful to us. And some of those results are just now coming in. We only had really 1 significant bloom last year. That was right around the 4th of July, but they did get some interesting data from that one. And then this year we're looking at, aside from some of the other work that we're doing, but we're looking to add a couple of bioassays here in this area in Edenton and also up the river, for looking at, again, what kind of nutrients these algae are taking up. And this is part of a larger work that's going to happen in Albemarle Sound. one of the concerns that the researchers have, and they should be concerned about this, is what the nutrient budget looks like for the whole sound. Because as you know, the Chewan does empty into it, as do other rivers, that, you know, the Pasquotank, the Paquimas, the Roanoke. All of those are contributors to the Albemarle Sound. So they're trying to parse out at this point what kind of nutrients are coming from where and what we should be doing about that. And limitations on nutrients is not something that's set by the state. As a matter of fact, very few states have nutrient limits, but there is a committee at this point that's working on that for our state. They set chlorophyll limits, but they don't set nutrient limits. So that said, some of this bioassay work helps us to define a little bit about what the maximum limits would be for a nutrient to be in a water to trigger a bloom. And if it's the threshold, then we need to keep it below that level. Okay, next slide. So what we know about the algal blooms, which is a short list compared to what we don't know, we know that there are a lot of unreported events to DEQ every year. People call up, some of those just never get reported. I worked very closely with the basin planners this year, and I was sort of astounded at how much wasn't reported. You know, they will report, or if somebody calls in and they can send out somebody from DEQ to verify that. But you guys know that, you know, the coves, the little inlets and stuff like that, sometimes these blooms pop up and then the next day they're gone. And that's just the nature of this, this type of organism. So they are affected by wind and other events, and so they move in and out very quickly. So sometimes before somebody can get up here, they're gone. Well, we do know that they can be very toxic. In 2019, and this is data that came from the Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh, there was a bloom up at Arrowhead Beach in Indian Creek that exceeded like 60 times what the EPA or what the World Health Organization limits would be for toxin. We know that in this river there are two predominant species, Dolichospermum and Microcystis. They both produce toxins. And we know that there are incoming nutrients to the Chewan River from many, many tributaries. Some of those vary immensely. Some of that is coming from Mark Powell's data with some of the Council of Governments grant. Okay, next slide. What we don't know is a really long list, and that's why it's important for us to continue our work with the researchers. We don't know what those nutrient limits are. What do we need to keep these algae in check? You know, what's the maximum threshold? And it varies from season because some of these algae they can fix their own nitrogen, which means they make their own fertilizer. So, you know, if that's said, then the only thing they really need is phosphorus. And so if we feed them more phosphorus, they'll just go hog happy till whenever they stop. So we need to be watchful of both the nitrogen and phosphorus at this point. We don't really know at this point what the major storms are doing to the flushing of our estuaries or those little tributaries, what's coming out of the swamps. And that's a little scary too, because some of these areas have been cut over and some of those wetlands are right down to the stream bed, so we don't know really how much stuff is pouring right directly into our streams. One of the things that we're exploring now with some of the researchers, and I think these are very interesting questions, is the types of nitrogen. There's different types that can come into our system. And right now, DEQ has data that the organic nitrogen is sufficiently high in this system. So we don't really know where that might be coming from. Could be a number of various places. And so more research needs to be done on that as well. And without question, and this is certainly a worldwide question for every state and every country in this world, is we know very little about why these things produce toxins when they do and when they're going to do that. So just looking at an algal bloom that looks thick and green and horrible and you don't want to swim in it, the bottom line is, you know, it might not be producing any toxins at all. Sometimes it doesn't even look bad and they are producing toxins. So we have a long ways to go with that for sure. Okay, next slide. So what we're proposing for this summer is we're going to be working very closely with DEQ on some public service announcements, some education about, they have a new app that will help people with their phone take a picture of an algal bloom. Unfortunately, a lot of green stuff in the water is not always algae. And so we want to make sure that people are reporting the right stuff, and so that if we send somebody out from DEQ, they can take that water sample and make sure that they're actually looking at a blue-green algae bloom and not something else. We're going to be still collecting for the Council of Government. We're going to be working with Haley and Malcolm and Dr. Pearl down at UNC on the continuation of the aerosolization project, both locations, Chewan Pembroke Creek. And then we're also proposing to this body if we would be able to do a bioassay in a couple of locations here in town to again find that threshold that will complement a study that's going to occur in Albemarle Sound. Dr. Hall has a 2-year grant, and I sort of explained this to Anne Marie a little bit in a letter, but basically this 2-year grant will take points all across Albemarle Sound. Most of them are midstream. As a matter of fact, all of them are midstream. And so those samples will be run and they'll be analyzed. There'll be assays to determine what's going on in the sound and a couple of the sites up our river, but again, all of them midstream. So when I talked with Dr. Hall, I said, would it be helpful to you to have some shoreline samples? And without a doubt, they would like that because it can vary considerably as to what kind of concentration of nutrients would be in those waters. It gets a lot more diluted when it's out midstream than it is right by the shoreline. He would really love to have some of that data, so I propose that we, kind of combine our talents and our efforts here and see if we could do a couple of assays here in town and up the river as well. Next slide. So what a bioassay is, it looks kind of complicated, but it really is not all that hard. We use 12 sample bottles. We take a before and after sample, so in other words, this is done twice. And so the before sample gets analyzed for all the things that an analytical lab would analyze for, the nutrient amounts, the type of algae that are there, et cetera, the chlorophyll. And then we add to 3 bottles, we add just plain nitrogen. And then we add to the next 3 bottles just plain phosphorus. And then we add in the next 3 bottles both a combination of nitrogen and phosphorus, and then the last 3 are simply just a control. And so then those are set back out into the river so that it's the same temperature and they're allowed to kind of sit there for a couple of days. And so the algae go to work and then they're pulled out. And then we do all sorts of filtering and we put them on ice and we send them down to the lab for analysis again. So what they're looking for in those 3 or 4 days that the bottles are out there is how much of those nutrients have the algae taken up. And what kinds do they like, and what the limits are. And so that's kind of what we would be doing. And so the cost for that is really all in terms of the analysis. And so these are not cheap to run. They do a full complement of the analyses on these. It's about $110, I think, a bottle for this analysis when it goes down to the lab. And then the rest of those costs are incidental. Of course, the CEG work is all volunteer. Okay. I'd like to open the floor if there are some questions. I know this is sort of technical. I've learned more, I think, in the last 5 years about algae than I ever learned when I was in college, but I think that's a good thing. Yes, sir?
Is it safe to fish in the sound in the river?
That's one of the questions that we're asking, okay? Right now, you should be aware that there is a dioxin. There's a 303D that just came out from the EPA that's up there, and the state is actually talking about that now. I was on a conference call last week with DEQ, and they're pushing it, so it probably will be approved. It's the 303D list is the recommended remediation list that comes out from the EPA. And this one has just come out and it was up for comments. But more than likely, they put that dioxin warning back up, and if I recall correctly, it's just to the south of Arrowhead Beach, all the way down to the Sound River Bridge, so a pretty substantial area. That would be for bottom fish. That would be something that's in the sediments. As for algae, they don't know at this point how much is being taken up by these, and the first thing that they'd look at would be crustacea because of the way they feed. So there are some studies right now that are looking very closely at blue claw crabs, other types of things that might be in our estuaries. But the higher up fish, of course, are going to be higher up on the food chain. But I think that question is a very big question out there is what we should be concerned about in terms of ecosystem impact, without doubt.
Okay, thank you.
Has anyone fallen ill this past year because of the algae?
Say it again?
Has anyone fallen ill because of it?
Gee, again, documentation on that is pretty slim. I get a ton of emails every summer, and I'm sure calls too. Can I go in the water? I'm not going to make that call. I mean, honestly, I think that's a personal decision at this point, but if the water is slimy and green, I don't think it's real smart to go in there. Documentation about illness, it can range. I have eye allergies and stuff all season long, so whether it's aggravated by the algae or not, I really can't tell you. That's a really tough question to ask or answer. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned two studies in one location.
Right.
And you're pushing for Pembroke.
Yeah, well, Pembroke or Queen Anne, and the reason I say both of those is I looked at the data before I came in today to see what kind of nitrogen and phosphorus levels are in the creeks here in town, and both Pembroke and we don't even talk about Indian Creek, that's a whole other story up there, but Pembroke and Queen Anne are both pretty high in both nitrogen and phosphorus from our samples, from what we're seeing. Well, it's been analyzed by UNC. And so I would say those are good bets. The reason for 2 samples is it's generally good because, as I mentioned, the complement of algae changes throughout the year. Actually, the first one, the Dolichospermum, used to be called Anavina, really looks stringy looking, is very predominant in the early summer. And they also have nitrogen fixers. Those are the ones that can support themselves. They don't need any more nitrogen. And so what happens is those sort of burn themselves out, the water gets a touch warmer, and they don't tolerate real warm conditions. Microcystis takes its place, which is clumpier looking in the water. It's a different, genre of algae. Both species produce toxins. However, they look differently and they act differently. Microcystis does not produce its own nitrogen. So the reason for 2 samples would be one to catch that spring, early summer complement of algae, and then the next one to catch the microcystis, which is going to be probably early fall. And that's been the trend here for the last 5 years. We want to be able to look and fairly say, oh, the water is full of nitrogen fixers. That's going to really change what the threshold is in terms of what those algae need. Or they are not nitrogen fixers. It's all predominantly the non-nitrogen fixers, and so that means that they got to rely on what's coming in from other sources to be able to survive, okay? So it makes a difference as to what we look at in terms of threshold. So yeah, it's a little fine art there, but that's the reason sometimes for spring, summer, and fall assays, so you can catch these seasonal differences. Water temperature changes, so do storms, and all those other things are players in all of this. Yeah.
That's enough.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Was summer of 2015, was that the worst that we've had in the last 5-6 years?
Here in town, it's the worst I've seen, yes. That was the first year that I drove by the water and said, uh-oh, we got some problems here. And I mean, those first slides on there where the water typically was really blue-green, that was from 2015. We haven't ever seen that right as bad as it was in 2015 since then. Now, we've had spotty blooms here and there. Edenton Bay's had a few, and up the creeks have had a few, but not that. The worst culprits in the last few years have been upriver and primarily Arrowhead Beach, Indian Creek. That's been really a hot spot up there. But that's not to say that it can't happen again. One of the things that the researchers have told me, and I certainly believe them, unless there's an impulse of a lot of storm water, heavy rains, tropical storms, hurricanes, the residence time in this river is very slow. In other words, the water doesn't move out of here real quick. So last year in June was a weird year because we got a lot of rain in June. And that's one of the reasons we're speculating we didn't see the blooms, because it sort of pushed everything on out. I don't think it was tropical storms. We just had rain every day, it seems, if we look at the climate records. But those things are going to impact on now 2015. If you went back and looked at the climatology before that year, you'd probably see a really dry spring, optimum conditions for stuff to just sit around and get stagnant. And that was kind of like the button there that, caused the blooms to explode in Edenton Bay, yeah.
And is there any sense that the improved numbers or outlook since then is just dumb luck, or are we starting to get ahead of this problem, or?
I don't think we're getting ahead of the problem. I know that because I was on a call last week with DEQ, they're continuing to sample up the river. They have 2 or 3 locations in the lower river, and they're still seeing the same values. They see some elevated nitrogens coming in on the west side of the river by Potocacy Creek. We've done some sampling up there as well. But I don't think we're getting ahead of it, and it's tougher even when the water temperatures get even more elevated. We simply do not know what the sources of all this, the nutrients might be. I mean, it's not as simple as it was 40 years ago where they could say, oh, it's those guys, okay? It's a lot more complex now because you've got multiple sources of organic nitrogen that could be coming in from any number of places. And so to get a handle on that, we're talking now about being able to do some very sophisticated fluorescent work with the researchers. Again, I feel very, I guess the word is honored to be able to work with these folks, because without them, we wouldn't have answers. We're starting to chisel away a little bit at what's going on up in this area. Otherwise, it would be just speculation. But those are the folks that know how to, they know how to do this. And so they're designing the experiments to get some answers to help us make the right moves when we have those answers. You know, what can we do to mitigate this or make it a little bit better or less each year? But we've got a long ways to go. It's not going to be fixed next year, frankly. Yeah. Mhm.
How will we learn the results of your study? How will that be conveyed to us?
Say it again, Roger, please.
How will we learn the results of your studies?
Yeah, so when I have actually brought a couple copies of the bioassay that we did 3 years ago. So it takes a couple of months, and of course with COVID last year, nothing got run because the labs were all closed. Everything was on ice for a whole year. But the data that came in from the CCRG grant that we got in 2019 was processed, and basically what that told us for Edenton Bay, that primarily throughout all 3 seasons that it was nitrogen limited. In other words, they needed nitrogen to be able to produce. That said, towards the end of the middle summer, when the spring was transitioning into early fall, when the summer was moving that direction, there were a great abundance of nitrogen fixers in there. And that was told when they added nitrogen, those algae just went blooming like crazy again. So yes, we can get the data, you know, the numbers, the numerical data it can be, you know, displayed, and certainly we can get access to all of that. They do a full complement. They split it down into, you know, organic nitrogen, inorganic phosphorus, chlorophyll levels, all sorts of other trace elements are in there as well too. And I wish I could say it was an easy story. I mean, I chisel away, I read a lot at this point to try to understand just how complex it is. Because when the pH changes, some of the chemistry of all this stuff too. So, I mean, just subtle changes like that can really throw the whole system in a different direction.
How do our counties upstream, like Providence County and Pasco County, do they have as big a problem with this as we do?
Where is that? Up in Virginia?
No. For Queens County and Pasco.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Okay, so for the last 3 years, the Council of Governments funded a Clean Water Act. They were funded with a Clean Water Act, substantial amount of money to do some, just on the spot, one day, go out and take a sample. And assay is a little different because it's a 3-day, 4-day process, so you watch the thing happening. But these one-shot deals, we sampled once a month all of the creeks in all of Potocacy Creek. And this last 2 years, we've done most of the east side tributaries on our side of the river. So the question is does Perquimans or Elizabeth City have the same issues? So the same group that's actually working with us, we've got a group in Perquimans that's sampling some of their tributaries. There's also a group in Elizabeth City that's doing the same as we are. And yes, the problems are becoming more pervasive in those areas just as they are here. So it's not just us. I mean, these problems are coming from all that, you know, backwater swamp. Well, a lot of it's coming from the backwater swamps, but we don't understand why it's being released so much and why that's triggering these blooms at this point, okay? Because the swamps have always been here. I mean, that's a fact. So the question that I think the researchers are looking at is, why is this happening now? You know, what's changing? What has changed in the system? And again, a number of things there, but we're not isolated in this. All of our tributaries, all the way down the line, are experiencing the same problems. Yeah. Yes.
I do have one question.
Yes, sir.
I'm thinking about the time that we've spent trying to help grab these samples from Public Works from time being here until now.
Sure.
From 2015 till
Right.
2021 for this year.
Right.
So from like a biochemistry standpoint, I understand that the nitrates and the phosphates are a reaction or some type of consumption to produce that algae.
That's correct.
But stepping back one step further from that, those nitrates and those phosphates are an end product of some type of organic nitrate or
That's right.
naturally occurring phosphate reaction. My question is the testing that's performed, are those speciated elements or is there surrogate use? And the reason I'm asking that is because if 7 items make up that one nitrate value,
Right.
have we found
Which
that-
is the one that's the problem,
which
right?
is a larger, because I would imagine the chemistry has changed from 15 to 21. So
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yes, I think in answer to your question, and I'm not a biochemist, but I think in answer to your question, they are running the species of nitrogen. So they're looking at nitrates, nitrites, organic nitrogen, all different types coming in. And what's showing up, and of course DEQ will tell you this too, what's showing up is higher concentrations of organic nitrogen. So they are breaking those apart. In terms of phosphorus, I don't think they're separating those. I think you just did a total P amount, okay? And so this area, because it's old seabed, has a lot of natural phosphorus here anyhow, and it will have forever. It's not going away. So, you know, that seems to be less of an issue than the nitrogen at this point. However, with the nitrogen fixers in the system, well, you know, then phosphorus becomes a problem because they can make their own nitrogen forever if they'd like to. And so that means that if you get a little addition of phosphorus in there from a storm or some, you know, disruption of the sediments, then they're going to go to town again and you know, reproduce, and then you'll have a bloom. So I don't know if I answered your questions or not, but I'd be glad to show you some of the stuff that I've brought from the lab, and you can take a look at it to see. I just cut a small piece of it. They do a lot of trace elements, but these are mostly the nitrates and the phosphates that they've, you know, spread or they've separated there. Did that answer your questions? I don't know about, you know, future. I mean, going back before to that, we started to send samples to UNC. In 2018, some of the first samples went down there. For the first 2 years, we didn't send anything out. We didn't have any access to any lab. We were just taking pictures and sending the stuff to NOAA, so we were documenting it. But when we started working with our partners down at UNC and some NC State researchers as well, then we started to realize that it would be valuable to have the chemistry behind this to know what was happening in this water, just to say, oh, well, we've got a bloom. So some of those initial samples, and then we, you know, again, a couple different labs, some of that stuff went to initially, but finally we sort of settled on UNC. They're expensive. I mean, the analytical labs are not cheap, as you all know, but they, you know, they do a very good job down there. Do you know Hans Pearl at all?
I'm not familiar.
Okay, yeah, he uses, you know, that lab uses really state-of-the-art type of analysis, so, yeah. Did I answer? Yes, okay.
Not one question.
Yeah, that biochemistry word got me there. I'm like, oh dear.
Are you still doing your testing at the fish hatchery? Are you still looking for additional space where you could?
Yes. We haven't been able to work at the fish hatchery at all this past year because they've been closed. So my driveway has been in the lab. But literally, yes. I think one of the things that I talked a little bit about this in the past about. Maybe it's part of, you know, Edenton's being a special place and going forward with a lot of different unique initiatives, is being able to have or provide some sort of laboratory facility in this area, because our samples right now go to Morehead City.
There might be the new boathouse, if that ever gets constructed, would be
Yeah.
an appropriate place to have such a lab.
Right. Well, last year we struggled I would say quite a lot, because the researchers, not only did we all have to mask and stay 6, I mean, you try doing science when you have to stand 6 feet, it's not easy. And so basically, you know, they had a whole list of restrictions. This year it'll be a little easier, but they still have to come up 2.5 hours from Morehead, and then they don't have any place to stay overnight. So they got to drive back. And so their days are 17, 18-hour days sometimes after they've, you know, done their full load of research, and then have to drive back to the lab. And I know a lot of them would welcome being able to be up here on site and stay for a couple of days. And that might be something that, you know, as an organization, we can think a little bit about, helping them find those places to bunk up and, you know, do their work. Research science is that's not a vacation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Anyone else have any questions for her? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
If we can do anything to help you with that, please let us know.
Well, I appreciate that. We work very hard on it, and all the members of the CEG do, and we all take Tewan County is our place. You know, we take it very seriously. We want it to stay as beautiful as it is. And so part of the efforts in doing this environmental work is to make sure that happens.
And we certainly support you in that
Thank you.
project. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is the presentation results of the Stormwater Assessment Phase 2. And with that, I'd like to welcome Anthony Roper back to the meeting and invite him to the podium to present results of the Stormwater Assessment.
Mayor and council and Anne Marie and staff, certainly thank you again for the opportunity to come back and speak with you. I will tell you, while she's pulling that up, that I probably won't impress you with data and facts like the previous presentation, but certainly it's some great work there, and certainly appreciate that. So, all right, so we certainly will I'll try to move through this really quickly and really hopefully try to get to the end and hopefully have some dialogue and some thoughts to share at the end. As you recall, we were here last summer, or early summer, to talk about phase one of data collection of a stormwater inventory and functional condition assessment. And so what I'd like to do today is kind of walk through the final results that we completed the phase two data collection. I'm going to walk through the final results and talk to you about what we found, a little bit about what that means, and maybe some suggestions for next steps. And so, as you recall, just to give you a quick overview of the project, we did develop the asset collection and data condition criteria. Won't go into the specific pipes, channels, and junctions that we were looking at. We did collect the data in two phases. And if you recall, the phases mirrored your water and sewer collection zones, trying to, as a strategy, collected in that same sequence. Since we finished that in the fall, we've been doing some QA/QC and analysis of that data. Now, obviously, COVID and other things have impacted our ability to wrap this up, but and certainly working with Ann and Corey, they've been gracious enough to kind of work with us as we go through that process. And so, so we have some deliverables. That's the data summaries, some maps, some report cards that have been very valuable to Corey, some GIS data that we'll leave with you that Corey can use for future, and then certainly the presentation tonight. We also already presented to Ann and Corey to get there to share with them some of this data, and then a summary report that will, when we conclude, incorporate their feedback that we will wrap up. So we'll jump right in. Advance, please. And so I just kind of want to set the context. When we talk about condition ratings, we have a 5 scale that we've looked at from very good to critical. There's a couple things to notice. Very good typically means there's no action required. Good means it's an acceptable physical condition, and typically there's no action required, but there may be some minor routine maintenance that's required. The fair is where you start getting into where you need to do a little closer examination. And there may be some renewal or replacement rehab activity in the medium term, which when I say medium term, I'm talking somewhere in the next 5 years, you may have to do something. The poor, you're starting to have some hydraulic performance issues, i.e. pipes are blocked, or there are some distresses in the asset, and you may have to do some immediate action or some rehab or repair or replacement in the short term. In short term, I'm defining as 2 years. And then critical is failed. You need to kind of take an immediate look at it, and there may need to be some immediate replacement repair work. So kind of keep those colors, yellow, orange, and red in particular, in mind as we go forward, because it all kind of correlates back to that. Those time frames as well, it kind of correlates back to that. So diving right in, there was, I guess, the key highlights to this is the data summary. There was roughly 2,900 assets that we collected. Again, this would be things like driveway pipe, cross pipe, junction boxes, manholes, catch basins. That's kind of those several types of assets that we looked at. And I think the key component of this is roughly almost half of the assets that we looked at. The condition evaluation of those was fair, poor, critical. And if you think back to the previous slide, fair, poor, and critical required some type of action. whether it be closer investigation inspection or some immediate go out and make some repair works. And again, the scorecards that I mentioned, and I think I showed you an example of those last time, Corey used those to plan work from. So kind of keep that in mind. About half the assets of the roughly 2,900 we looked at require some type of further evaluation and potential for some work. Next slide, please. And so as you drill in a little deeper to that, about 1,400 of those assets that we looked at were small, what I call small pipe. That's pipe that's roughly 24 to 48 inches. About 1,400 of those, and again, about 55% of those are fair, poor, critical. Now, when we say pipe and condition will be fair, poor, critical, what we mean is that there is some percentage, you're starting to lose some hydraulic performance, and it could be for varying reasons. It could be debris. So maybe repair may simply be to go flush it out or go simply remove some debris. But it also could mean there was the end joint was crushed or broken or fallen. There could have been a hole in the pavement that indicated there's some type of joint separation. So there's varying degrees of condition that would lend it to be, cause it to be fair. And in the report that Corey gets, we'll kind of further define what the particular obstruction was at each of the assets. Next slide.
Computer's not behaving.
Okay, good. And as she, thank you. As we look next is the junctions, and it says CB, that's a catch basin. Again, about 1,000 catch basins. Again, 52% fair, poor, critical. Again, that means it broken. Something was broken in it. It was blocked and not performing that way. Down at the bottom, JB is a junction box, and that's an underground structure, typically where you got pipe from different directions feeding into a junction. And typically because you got utilities and other things, you can't connect them directly, so you build a junction box and they all kind of go through a junction box. It's kind of the bane of Corey's existence when he comes out in the middle of the night and he's got a stormwater, he might have sewer, he might have storm, those things come together, and he might have other utilities going through it. So knowing where they are is important, but also having them function is important as well. So again, 60% of those are in that fair, poor, critical. Next, please. Manholes, this junction is a manhole, and again, there's not many manholes there to consider, but again, just showing you, again, fair and critical. Then channels will be ditches. Again, there's 387 assets, and what that means is there's about roughly 10 miles or so of drainage features across. There's probably more than drainage features across town. There's several miles of drainage features, but we collected them in 387 asset types. So that'd be the roadside ditches, that'd be outfall ditches, and those types of things. And again, great news here is about 80%, 78, close to 80% are in good shape. And so I think that's a testament to the work of your public works staff and the work they do to keep the ditches maintained. Next, please. These next few slides are just the mapping of these assets. I know it may be a little difficult to see here, but you'll see some dots. Again, the dots coincide with that scheme we see. So you see a little green dot, a yellow and an orange. These are for the large pipe. These are pipe that is greater than 48 inches. There's only 5 of those type structures in town, and so you see those dots. We'll move quickly through these. These are just the maps of those numbers that I was showing you. These are the small pipe, the 24 to 48 inch pipe, and again, just looking at the map, you see the yellow, greens, reds, and oranges. These are the conditions, kind of show you the pipe networks across the town. I think the one to start to notice is you look at the yellow, which is the fair, it pretty much spreads across town. So you can't necessarily say identify a trend, one section of town versus the other in terms of the small pipe and their condition. Next, please. This is the catch basin and drop inlets. Again, these are the condition evaluations. Again, you see the dot distribution, dark green being very good, light green good, and so forth. Again, just really trying to show illustratively the makeup across town. Next, please. And these are the junction boxes in their locations, as well from a condition perspective. Just again, give you a map representation of that. Next, please. And these are the manholes, and then you can, next would be the ditches. Next. And this last map is just looking at the critical and the poor, so the orange and the red dots, the ones that would need some immediate attention for at least an inspection. And so just wanted to kind of show you where they are, and this is across the asset types. And so this would be all ditches, manholes, catch basins, junction boxes, across this is just a map showing those critical and poor that would require some immediate attention. One of the things that Corey asked us to do was, okay, I've got these different types of assets across town that have different condition criteria. How can we prioritize across assets these different features? So one of the things that we can look at is what we call a risk analysis, and this is really a prioritization tool. And so to determine risk is you look at the condition, which is that probability of failure, but then you also consider the criticality rating or the impact. So if you have a ditch that's clogged up, that's in an isolated area, that's not an issue, and it's blocked up, it's not going to have the same impact if you have a major 48-inch culvert that's one of your major drainage features, I guess, in town. If it fails, then the impact of that failure is more dramatic than the impact of some of the other assets. Having a broken manhole cover may not be the same impact, again, as having a junction box that's failed or full. So when we look at risk analysis, this is a way to consider that. I won't get into the gory details of this, but you look at, from a criticality standpoint, you look at things like street classification. Is it a commercial area? Is it a major route? Is it a heavy traffic generator? You look at that. What zone is it? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? What facility types are near? Is it near the hospital? Is it near a school? Then looking at asset type, again, a large culvert, it has more value than, say, a drop inlet or a driveway pipe because of the impact of it. And then we applied some weights to those. We did talk to Corey about those and applied some values, but this is something that as you go further, you can certainly evaluate those weights. We also looked at flooding. What's some of the historic flooding areas in town? And so obviously if you've got a historic flooding area, you certainly want to make sure that your ditches are open in those areas. And so we added some value to that. And then there's also this asset type. You see the scoring system we have for those. So using that was a way to kind of rank the assets across the asset types to kind of bring some conformity to those and add some value to those. Next. And so doing that, so this next map is, as we look at those priorities as most of those risk scores, again, this is a map of the highest priorities given across assets. And so you see those little dots, and those are the ones that, if we were planning work or budgeting work funding, you may want to focus your efforts on those on those assets that have the higher risk score first. So it's a way to kind of take the condition data and the impact if something goes wrong and compare those across the assets. Then that's what this does. Okay. So what were some of the findings and observations? Again, just kind of put into words some of the things I think you've seen on the maps and some of the other tables. 13 or about 400 of your assets have a risk score of critical or poor, which means there's some loss of hydraulic performance. There's some immediate repair or attention needed. Now again, some of this may be Corey just needs to go out and look at it, and he might remove some debris or flushing out a pipe, may fix some of that. Some may require an actual pipe replacement or joint replacement or joint repair, something more cost substantial. About 36% or 36.4 or 1,000, roughly a little over 1,000 assets have a risk score of failure. Again, those are assets that probably that's moderate to significant deterioration evident, moderate loss of hydraulic performance. failure is not likely in the next 2 years, but certainly over the next 5 to 10 years, you want to start looking at planning for the rehab or replacement of those assets. Again, as I said earlier, if you looked at the dots distribution across the map, the risk and condition challenges in each zone, if you look across each zone, you can't say the trend says it's in one area of town versus the other. There was some impact across town. I guess an observation, a significant portion of the town's infrastructure has considerable age. Some of it, in fact, may be the original infrastructure that was installed, I guess, when it became part of the town network. And so, again, without elaborating on that, that certainly suggests some of the challenges that may lie ahead for things that may be functioning well today when it does have a life cycle, and at some point it gets to the end of that life cycle. So the major focus of this study was on asset location, which is the inventory component, and visual observation of functionality. No detailed inspections were performed, i.e. we didn't run cameras through the pipe to look for cracking and other things like that. It was, when we went through the structure, was it open or blocked? Was water flowing through it and coming out where it's supposed to come out? It was that kind of analysis. It wasn't the detailed analysis to kind of start putting together cost estimates of those things. And the data collected was most useful for prioritizing current maintenance needs and emergency response, which is one of the things that Corey, when he liked to know where the stormwater is. So when he goes out, I think he has mapping of his sewer assets and some of those things. And so now when he goes out at night, he should have a pretty good sense for where his stormwater assets are. Because I know a lot of times that is when there's a leak or something, trying to determine whether which is it stormwater or sewer is part of the challenge that he faces. Next slide, please. Now I guess I'm going to go into the evangelizing, if you would, these next few slides. I do think the effort of the Public Works Department to do an inventory of its assets and move to a planned versus reactive maintenance should be strongly supported. Again, obviously I've been in this business for 30 plus years. And typically we reacted, and so it's much more expensive to respond to catastrophic failures than to have a systematic planned approach to doing a maintenance activity. And so I thank Corey and Anne Marie for their leadership and vision for this type of effort. That should be commended. Secondly, as we can see, consistent investment in stormwater maintenance and capital planning is imperative. Again, as you mentioned, you got a 50-year-old or so infrastructure. You've got half of your assets have some type of maintenance need. And so that progresses. Unfortunately, there's no magic bullet that gets better with time. It typically gets worse with time. And so certainly being proactive about planning for that maintenance is important. And so lastly, I would say that I would encourage the town to strongly consider the development of a comprehensive asset management plan. I will say, again, it certainly can be the council's legacy to really have the forethought to look at what are our needs and how can we best position the town going forward to be able to address those needs so that you're not dealing with catastrophic failures, I guess, when they come up. Because if you keep sticking a Band-Aid on it, eventually over time, that's exactly what happens. That's just an observation. It's not unique to Edenton. I think this is a challenge across North Carolina and the country that is, if you look at it from a transportation standpoint, the interstate system built in the 50s, and how a lot of those infrastructures haven't been maintained or haven't been improved over those times to deal with growing populations and other things, as we're saying. So I would ask you to consider that. Advance, please. Again, I won't spend any time on that, and this will be in the summary that kind of talk about what an asset management approach would look like. It would be, as a council, develop an asset management policy, in conjunction with the staff, develop a strategy for asset management, from that strategy, develop a plan, and then prioritize and implement that plan. And so those would be the steps that would go to it. It takes into account not only the inventory and the condition, but also the financial pieces and making sure you got those infrastructures in place as well to be able to fund and those types of activities. And so, next slide, please. And so when you say asset management plan, what does that mean? Certainly as a town, the assets you have, and you can certainly include whatever assets you like, but you've got buildings, you've got equipment, you've got vehicles, You know, you got roads, you got bridges, you got stormwater as we're talking about tonight, you got water system, you got sanitary sewer. In town of Edenton also has electric. And so it would be doing some type of inventory and condition assessment of all of those assets and then developing a long-term viewpoint for that. So again, I won't spend any time on that, but I've had to have some dialogue with Corey and Ann about that. I certainly wanted to put that in front of the council as well, because I do think the council plays a big part of that in terms of understanding the needs of your town, understanding the level of services, and helping set that framework for the level of service that you expect, that your community expects, and then having a vision for how do you deliver that. So the final project steps would be the deliverables. As I said, we will give you the GIS data, so the data is yours, it's not ours, and so we certainly will pass that on in the format that Corey sees fit. Those asset scorecards that we mentioned, basically for every asset, there was pictures taken, there was condition assessment we talked about was done, those condition description was done, so those were given to Corey. So certainly those that were fair, poor, or critical, he already has those in his possession. I think from phase one, his team already were using those to plan some of the maintenance activities, so now he has them for all 2,900 assets, regardless of the condition. And then lastly, the condition summary report, and in that condition summary report, you know, obviously the logical question is, what does it cost to address some of these challenges? So there will be a back of the napkin cost summary in that condition summary report that we will spend some time with Ann and Corey kind of going over methodology and how we can arrive at those numbers. And really, I think CJ, I didn't introduce CJ, but Carlton Jackson, CJ, who's here in town, he's on the volunteer, he's on the fire department, he volunteers here, and so local resident. So this is home for us, and glad to have worked here with you on this project. But CJ had a great analogy. He said it's kind of like you go into the stadium to the ball game, and so the back of the napkin will put you in the parking lot. You're not in your seat eating popcorn, you know, those things, but it kind of gives you a scale. What's the scale? If we wanted to start planning, what would it look like for us to think about in the short term, in that midterm, and in that long term? So we're working on that. We'll certainly have some dialogue with Corey and Ann about that as we wrap this up. So with that, went a little long than what I intended, but I do on Sundays as well, but Reverend Poole, that's okay. So with that, I'll stop and try to entertain any questions anyone may have.
How do we compare your assessment? I'm sure you've done other cities like size. How do we compare with like cities?
The results, I hate to say it this way, but the results really don't surprise from city to city. And reality is, I think, and again, my background is in DOT, but for years, most departments were reactive. And so when you're reactive, you typically, you know, it progressively deteriorates because you're reacting to citizen complaints and, you know, call outs if you get in the middle of the night because something fails and breaks down. And so I would say it's typical of what you would find. And then the other thing you look at, that in a town, the historic town like Edenton, where you have certainly how do you preserve the integrity of the town and what it means, that's important. And so you're not trying to rip up your streets, and you're not trying to do those types of major capital plans, programs often. And so the infrastructure has got some age on it. And so as it ages, it naturally breaks down. So I'd say it's typical.
Do you think corrective actions could be completed, therefore critical within a 3-year?
I think that's absolutely what Corey's goal is to take those fair, obviously the critical ones, he's looking at those immediately, but the fair ones, I think, developing a plan. I think it's reasonable to develop a plan. Obviously, that's certainly the council and the town administration's prerogative in terms of how it funds those activities and prioritize those, but I think it's reasonable to, at least from my vantage point, to take those and maybe prioritize those maintenance activities and get those taken care of.
Henry, do we know about when our system was put in?
How old it is?
1493.
Well, just to kind of chime in on that, so one of the oldest maps I have on file is from the 20s and 30s.
Is that right?
And one of the things that really surprised us is when we kind of got to the last few items that we were trying to address to wrap this up, where there were more questions than answers. One of the things that we actually found is wood laid bottoms in some of these, what are really not a culvert, they're really not a pipe, they're more of a tunnel that has 3 to 4 different very large sized wooden structures that's at the bottom, and the brick form of the pipe, and its supporting outside is really crowned in a way where it's hand built, and then most of that was covered by some type of thin sheet metal, and concrete was poured in place on top to add additional cover. There's no telling how old the section that we're talking about, we're not very far from as we sit, and it was a shock to see a wooden similar structure.
What I like about Corey says is there's a lot of ingenuity, and so you kind of use what you had. So it may have started as a wood structure, and then when there was some maintenance needed, there was a steel plate put over it at some point, or what. And then having again worked in this area. So I've worked here, I've worked in Columbia, I live in Columbia, worked in Columbia, Crestville, Roper, all of these surrounding towns. Where you're trying to come in and retrofit a solution or repair without ripping up and starting over. So you'd be surprised. There's a lot of those types of what I would call creative engineering to keep these things functional. And so it's great work. I mean, obviously you see how long they've been there. And so it's great work. So I mean, in some cases it didn't make sense to come in if you've got one pothole that you're trying to repair. It didn't make sense to rip out the entire structure because you don't know what's there. Then you've got utilities, you've got all kinds of other challenges that ultimately they'll have to be dealt with. But I can certainly understand through the years why they weren't dealt with. When they had a maintenance issue to look at. Yes, sir.
Well, obviously we can.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I'm sure yours is more important than mine. Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand it was, so we make the repairs on these critical systems. At what point, and then at what point do we begin to address the actual flooding in neighborhoods? Is this lead to that? Or is this just a study of the infrastructure?
This is studying infrastructure, but what I would say to that is that if everything is functioning and is fully open and functioning, and you still have problems, then that says you should kind of take a deeper dive to do some type of hydraulic analysis to see. Because again, the pipe that was put in, in the 20s or 30s, it may have just been what was available. So now, when we've got all this data from the hurricanes, I think Hurricane Floyd in '99 was kind of a game changer in eastern North Carolina. We used to design for a 100-year flood, and they said that was a 500-year event. So now the hydraulic analysis have changed, and so where a 24-inch pipe may have been adequate, when it was done, now that same hydraulic analysis based on the watershed might be twice as big. So I think what this does is, what's the current infrastructure? Is it functioning? Can we make repairs to have it function? But then if you're still having historic, frequent flooding, then you need to take a deeper dive to look at, do a hydraulic analysis to see, is the structures adequate? I think we have a project that we're working on, that SEPI's working on with the town now. Similar kind of conversation is what would be the adequate drainage structure given today's environment? Obviously you got development, you got other things that have happened, you got more house structure, you got more pavement, you got more parking lots, you've got different things that affect the drainage, not just the function, whether or not the infrastructure is functioning. So, great question.
There are a couple of obvious things here. One, the materials and all that are made today that would be used today is much more functional and better than what was done back then. However, and it's obvious we can't go in there and dig up all this soil to replace it and this type of thing. So what is our option in these really poor areas? What is our option that we can go in and do to get these things up to par?
Well, again, I think my perspective is that some of the critical areas, the court needs to look at those, see what is it something that can be rectified with maintenance. And then if you decide it's failed and you need to replace it, then you do more detailed study to see what the solutions are. In some cases, we talk about, pipes don't have to be replaced. You might do something like put a slip liner. You talk about materials. There's some types of strategies that are available to us today that haven't been available to us before. So some, you might stick basically a slip liner in it. So it kind of gives you the opening, it secures the opening, it secures the integrity of that opening without having to replace it. Quite frankly, I think where you can avoid digging open, cutting, and taking out and replacing, it's going to save you money, it's going to save you time, and can really extend the life of that without having to go through such a catastrophic repair. So I think you kind of go through the range of options and then find the most cost effective. Again, this is why I talk about asset management planning, because what that does is you determine the level of service, you determine also the life cycle. If we expect a road, for instance, to be paved and it lasts for 20 years, what does it take to do that? You have a pipe, and you say if it's a concrete pipe, we expect it to be in place 75 years. And so what do we need to do to kind of start working towards that type of life cycle? So those are the types of policy kind of conversations and decisions that council and staff makes when you put it together an asset plan like that. So that's why I advocate for those types of things.
I had the opportunity to go out last Friday with Mr. Corey and the engineer from Europa, Mr. Jackson or Anthony. But I found Public Works has big equipment that can do long jobs that's about 4 foot wide. And you couldn't take that out on the little hose, but they have a packer for the little hose. And I didn't see a torch, an industrial torch. But the problem is with these holes in all of these streets, they're outpacing Public Works employees the ability to fix these holes and keep up with them. And a lot of these holes have been, especially around manholes and corner streets when you turn around and into the street. A lot of these holes have been there for a good while. Some of them is 3-4 inches deep. When you hit one, you know it. But my recommendation is that Public Works needs more money, that they can have more help, that they can they can catch up with these holes in the street. Because what happens is, the longer those holes stay there, the bigger they get and the deeper they get. So we have a great group that is excited about making Edenton the most beautiful city, a town. But if you come in a beautiful town and you look and fall in some of these holes, you change your mind. I hope that Public Works can get more people that they can train to put on these streets to fix them up the way it was. Some streets need to be tarred, because that tar works pretty good. When it cracks in the street, when they tar them, that works pretty good. And then some streets need to be patched.
I'll leave that to the capable hands of Corey Ann and his council. I will say, just globally, what Reverend Poole is talking, I did enjoy spending an afternoon with him last week riding around, touring the city. But it fits in this conversation about your asset strategy, and pavements is one of those assets. and how do you prioritize, is it maintenance versus resurfacing? All of those are, again, decisions that this able body, can consider and trust it to make the right decision for your constituents here in Dunedin. So I'll leave it at that, and certainly enjoyed Reverend Poole and appreciate Corey for his time that he spent with us last week.
Well, Anthony, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very detailed and very good, and we certainly thank you for it.
And certainly thank the town for the opportunity. I'd be remiss in that, Ann's the only person I know. She started at 27. She's leaving. I think I heard somebody say she was leaving at 33. I don't know how she did that, because I didn't age that gracefully. And when I was the county engineer across the sound, and then worked in the NCDOT in the division, I've said before, Ann's been a great partner. And I certainly acknowledge her for her leadership, and just really her kindness and friendship over the years have been tremendous. And so she's been a great asset to the council and town. Thank you, and appreciate, again, if you got work opportunity in this role to come work with the town as well. So she'll be missed, and we'll miss her, but I know that it gets the time, we all know when it is, and so I certainly celebrate her and her accomplishments and her contributions to Edenton and to Eastern North Carolina. So thanks, Ann, and thanks you again.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a resolution in opposition of.
Mayor, oops, sorry.
I had one more question. I was, and when you mentioned a user fee, implementing a user fee to pay for this, what is your thinking on how that would be done and what the amount might be?
Well, Corey and Virginia and I we watched a really informative webinar last year from the School of Government on how to establish a stormwater and utility fund. And, looking at some numbers, I think is part of the budget that we present to you shortly for the next fiscal year, we'll give you some options. It may not be that you're able to do that, to implement that this year, this coming year, but a user fee based on a residential fee, and then commercial, and then your industrial and institutional customers is something that I think the town is going to have to strongly consider in order to pay for the long-term repairs that are needed. I have an idea of what I think would work, but want to spend some more time with Anthony and Corey on that. But we'll definitely be giving you some recommendations as part of the budget to consider.
Sorry, man.
I didn't mean to cut anyone off. Is any other, I thought we were through any other questions?
I know.
Any other question? If not, we'll move on to section E, which is we have a resolution in opposition of House Bill 401 and Senate Bill 349, increasing housing opportunities. And I'll call on Anne Marie if she will to go.
Sure, Mayor, thank you. The council knows that once in a while, the League of Municipalities issues a legislative alert, and I think they're really careful about doing that. They only sound the alarm when they're very concerned that a piece of legislation may be moving forward that would cause harm to local governments. And we got that alert recently, and I would venture to guess that we probably only get one alert a year. Would you think, Tammy? It's not something that they abuse. And so when we get the alert, we take it seriously. And this is regarding a bill that would really change single-family zoning and decisions that, legislative decisions that the council would make and that the planning board could recommend regarding housing. And the wording that the league was using in terms of the alert, saying that the legislation would severely reduce or would eliminate the tradition of local zoning, caused me to want to reach out to Senator Steinberg, because at that time, I think it was just a Senate bill that had been introduced. And I asked him what his opinion was, and he was very, very concerned about the legislation. And he strongly recommended that the local governments in his district review the bill and consider taking a stand and opposing it. And subsequent to that, the league put out some briefing papers, which we included in your packet this weekend. And if you had time to read them, I think you, like I would be very, very concerned. And since then, the Albemarle Commission, the Regional Council of Governments, has sent out a proposed resolution. They adopted a resolution, and they're urging local governments to adopt it as well. I mentioned in the report that perhaps Councilman Miller and Councilman Coleman may have heard something about this at the City Vision Conference last week, but their attention was focused in other sessions. But I do think the bill is alarming. What really concerned me is that the co-sponsors, it's so unusual in this environment. The co-sponsors, there's a Republican and a Democrat. And it makes me think something crazy is up, because it's really, I think, very overreaching in terms of legislation.
What precipitated all this? How did this all start?
I honestly, I think there's so much pressure in some of the urban areas for multifamily housing, and I think I don't want to say that the home builders are pushing this, but it has to do, I think, with market and demand, and I'm just at a loss. There's something else, I think, going on that
Some undercurrent. It appears that way.
But again, on Friday, if you receive the weekly report from the league, they're urging local governments to take a stand. I would recommend, if you adopt the resolution tonight, that we send a copy of it not only to Representative Goodwin and Senator Steinberg, but also to the co-sponsors. I think they need to know that there are communities outside of their district that are opposed to the legislation.
Will the word get out to other towns and cities and to do the same thing?
I think the league is doing a good job
Great.
with that. They are.
Okay, any further questions? Then at this time, I would entertain a motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion, do we have a second? We have a motion and a second.
Yeah.
Any further discussion?
Reverend Poole has a question.
Okay.
No, I thought he did. I thought,
Now I was seconding the motion.
Uh,
Just Easter question.
Any further discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
This would go to the co-sponsors as well as Representative Goodwin and Senator.
And we'll send it to the league as well, so they'll know.
Okay, the next item F, is a budget amendment, landfill minibus. I'll call on Anne Marie for that, please.
So hopefully you had a chance to inspect the minibus outside the council chambers tonight. Corey's crew deployed it. It looks a lot better inside,
100% better.
100% better inside. And we are asking for the budget amendment so that we can purchase the vehicle from the I think it's the Equipment Skates Chowan landfill, solid waste authority. And then some funding to pay to have it repainted. And we think it'll be a great asset to us to use not only for employees and special events, but Tammy does a great job working with people who want to rent the trolley after hours for special events, and somebody may want to rent the new minibus as well. But we always provide the driver. We was just, we just can't hand the vehicle over.
Would it be painted in the future?
Well, this budget amendment
It's for-
includes funding
Okay.
to do the repainting.
And I believe I heard you say that it was gonna be painted similar to the new trolley.
Yes. Not as elaborate, but you'll know it's.
It's painted.
Any further questions of Anne Marie on this item? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
And we have a motion?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, I'll ask if all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We can now buy the van. Okay, and the next item G is a waiver of a nuisance abatement fees redevelopment zoning property on 211 West Gale Street. And Anne Marie, I'll call on you again.
Yes, Mayor, and we're very excited. We've been working really hard trying to figure out a way to get this property to market so that it can be sold, because it is in condition that it can be rehabbed, it can be brought back to a livable dwelling unit. And right now, it is a real nuisance to the neighborhood. It's a drag on the town. I mentioned I had gotten a call last week about foxes have taken up residence inside, and we're working on getting that abated. But the big problem was, over the years, the number of times the town has had to mow the property because the property was basically abandoned by the property owner, and we had thought a strategy of charging a significant administrative fee would get their attention to take responsibility, but that didn't work. And so we have almost $8,000 in nuisance abatement fees on the property, and that, coupled with the back taxes that are owed, exceed the value of the property, and so nobody's willing to purchase the property for that amount. And we would have to go through a long or the county would have to go through a long tax foreclosure process. But Hood, when Elizabeth and I met with Town Attorney Hood Ellis to see was there anything unique about this property, the fact that it was in the redevelopment zone, could we ask the council to waive those fees? And Hood consulted with the School of Government and also with the tax foreclosure attorney. And because it is in the redevelopment zone and that the sale will help prevent blight of the neighborhood, and that there is public good in what will happen as long as the property is redeveloped, then all parties agreed, all of the legal parties agreed that that was in the town's right to do so. So we're asking that if the property makes it to a closing with a developer, and I think it will, but that we would have to make sure, we would really want to make sure that that developer, we would vet the redevelopment plan the same way we vet the plans when we sell property to a developer in the redevelopment zone. And if things work out that that person has the financial wherewithal and makes the commitment, then if you grant authority to waive, then I think that will be a way to put this property back into good use.
Who owns this property now?
It is a woman who lives in Georgia. She had family here. I think she was an heir to the property.
Oh, okay.
I think she lives in Savannah, Georgia.
That's a nice area of town.
Well, it's
Really,
changed a lot thanks to the town's redevelopment zone.
Yeah, it has.
Any further questions of Anne Marie on this?
I just got a few comments and maybe a question. I have my concerns, but I'm in favor of it. My concern would be precedent and how do we distinguish this from the next request? And I think you've done a good job of doing that. There's some good reasons why we should do it, but I just want to make sure that when we do it, there are good reasons and that those good reasons are put on the record, so to speak, in the minutes, either by our comments or Anne Marie's comments or the next town manager's comments. But I am in favor of it. One question I did have is, we're doing this in the hopes or the understanding or the intent that the property will be redeveloped, and what guarantees or protections do we have on that, if any?
It would be, I mean, we could ask the developer to submit their plan for redevelopment. We could, I think right now, when we sell a house, we require that they make substantial progress within, I think it's either 1 year or 2, I think it's 1 year, and then they can get a renewal, so.
Yeah.
Is that?
Will we have the same protections in this deal as we would in the other ones that we've done?
With your question, that I think the council as part of the motion could require that we have the contingent upon waiving is that the developer would abide by the conditions that the town sets when it sells property in the redevelopment zone.
That's important to me. I don't know if anybody else would. I'm in favor of it, but I want to make sure.
Well, it wouldn't be abated until closing, if I understand it correct, what you're saying. Correct. Yeah.
But there's no way we can recoup any of this money from the
So-
sale of this property that the town has put into it?
No, and I mean, if we don't waive it, the property's just gonna sit.
After we waive it, can we come back and put it in?
No, but the good thing is the back taxes will be paid, so we'll be getting that money that we haven't received.
Okay.
And then the property, if it is sold, will be, and redeveloped, the property value will increase and the new owner will pay taxes.
Okay.
And the other thing is to point out that the actual costs that we incurred were not $8,000. A bulk of that fee was the administrative fee that we were trying to get the property owner's attention. And that strategy didn't work, and we stopped doing that a couple of years ago.
Okay.
On all properties that we mow.
Any further questions of it?
My concern was that if somebody saw this meeting and saw that y'all waived an $8,000, let's say tax on a piece of property, why can't you do the same for me?
Yes.
You know, that was it, but you straighten that out. Okay.
She's good at straightening us out.
I know, I've been learning a lot from the last past 8 years.
Okay, any further questions of Anne Marie on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion to waive the fees
So moved.
with the stipulations as we discussed.
So moved.
And we have a motion, we have a second.
Second. It's getting late.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We're getting silly now.
It's the wrong night.
If not, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, the next item is the rejection of upset bid for sale of the old landfill property. And once again, I'll call on Ms. Anne Marie.
Okay, Mayor, we did receive an upset bid, and the person who was interested in purchasing the property said they wanted to buy it to hunt on the property, to do deer hunting. And the airport commission, a couple of the members were concerned about that, given the proximity of the property to the airport. And they suggested that the town require, put a covenant saying no hunting on that property. Well, we allow hunting on the airport property to eradicate deer as a potential hazard to aviation. I just didn't feel comfortable saying that, or recommending to you all that you put that stipulation. So I called Jay Talbert, who is your consulting aviation engineer, and asked him, if this property is located at the north end of the runway, is that property any different than property that the town owns on the southern end where we allow hunting, and even, I guess, to the east of the airport? And he said, Anne Marie, he said, I'm a hunter. He said, and as a matter of fact, I hope you know I'm an avid hunter. But I'm also, in the business of protecting airports and aviation. And he said, I just cannot see how that would be, how hunting on that property would be a hazard to the airport or to air traffic. And he said, I would recommend that no hunting with dogs. But I've since learned that wildlife doesn't allow hunting with dogs south of the bypass, so that isn't the case. But Jay Talbot said that this all triggered in his memory that we used this old landfill property years ago, back in 2009, Tammy helped me find it, as a way to satisfy a in-kind match for a grant that we got out there. And Jay's concern was that if we sold it and that the FAA could come back and say, wait a minute, you benefited from this property years ago, you got a $300,000 grant, and you used this property and said it was part of the airport, and then you sold it. So he recommends that we not sell it at this time, that we go through the process to have it formally incorporated into the big airport tract of land. And then if we determine that it's not needed for aviation, and it's not, we could petition the FAA to release the land from the airport and go through this upset bid process down the road. So I feel very comfortable recommending that you reject the bids, and then you authorize us to try to proceed with having the old landfill parcel merged with the airport property.
But there's another reason I think that it should be objected. If they can use it to hunt, as they do hunt on the airport property, then they couldn't use a high-power rifle because they had to build some statues up 10 foot high. You can't shoot a high-power rifle standing on the ground. So that is a law for deer hunting any wildlife.
Yes, so we have very strict requirements about what type of hunting, what safety precautions have to be abided by and it's only town employees and county employees that are allowed to do that at the airport, and they're under a very tight oversight by the airport.
We rejected it, so that's the good
Yes.
part.
Any further questions of Anne Marie on the rejection of the bids? If not, I will entertain a motion to reject the bids.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carried. And then to our final item tonight is our committee meeting, and that is the Finance Committee. And since Councilman Dixon is not here tonight, I believe Councilman Coleman is going to take care of that for you.
In the absence of Councilman Dixon, we have two items, Mayor. The first one is the budget amendment to move $4,495 received from the sale of firearms by the police department, to move that to the police contingency fund. I think you remember that the police received a grant to buy new rifles, and then they sold their old rifles, as I remember, and that's where the $4,495 came in. So I think we would like to recommend sending this to the full council for consideration at the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the second item is, has to do with transferring $48,000 from the water and sewer funds to cover costs of the chemical and salt that's been needed to help purify the water at Beaver Hill plant. I think this is, as I understand it, we have a way of reducing this cost in the future, but we had some cost overrides this year to increase the purity of the water, and we're recommending that the full council consider this next meeting the transferring of $4,800 from the water and sewer fund to cover the cost of chemicals and salt.
Okay, that completes our agenda for tonight. We'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion adjourned.
Only me, huh? Yeah, we don't have many of those, but it's all right.
Wow, that just ain't me. A lot of stuff going on.
Yeah,